In the next hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets. We will be talking about the $100 million transaction between Allianz and Jubilee Insurance, the largest insurance company in East Africa, in just a moment. But first, the Q3 numbers. Nigeria is really the surprise performer over Q3, 9.1% higher in the last 12 weeks. Kenya's Indice 20, on the other hand, was down by nearly 5% over that time frame. Indices at the JSE a bit mixed, all shared down about 0.4%. The top 40 ending nearly 1% higher, however. US equities had an interesting third quarter. The S&P 500 nearly 9% higher. The Nasdaq Composite also rising 10.8% higher, even after falling though from highs hit in late August. Here's what's coming up tonight. Kenya's central bank holds interest rates exactly where they are as the economic outlook improves despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Zambia is asking Eurobond holders to suspend debt payments, but will they agree? And we'll explore why some are expecting a second wave of coronavirus infections to trigger even more job losses in the United Kingdom. Right then, a fair bit to get through in the program tonight. But let's start the hour in Kenya, where an accommodative policy stance and stable inflation saw the central bank retain its policy rate at 7% barely 24 hours ago. That MPC decision came a day before the release of second quarter data, which has now been delayed to, well, whenever the data is ready, according to the stats agency. Now, according to a median estimate of 6 economists in a Bloomberg survey, economic output in East Africa's largest economy is expected to have contracted by at least 2.6% in the 3 months ending in June compared to a year earlier. The central bank governor, Patrick Njoroge, however, says that economic indicators for the third quarter point to a strong recovery. Inflation in Kenya remained fairly subdued at 4.4% in the month of August. It actually declined in September. And inflation is expected to stay within the central bank's target range of between 2.5% to 7.5% at least in the near term. All right then, so there's quite a bit to get through as far as Kenya's not macro policy, but monetary policy data is concerned. Let's dig into that with Churchill Ogutu. He's the head of research at the fund manager Genghis Capital. Churchill, good to see you on the program. So let's start with the bank sector. Over $10 billion in loans. That's nearly 40% of the total bank sector loan book have been restructured. As a proportion of the total household loans are about $2.5 billion or so. Do you expect that figure to rise even further this year?
Thank you, Ramah, for having me on board today, this evening. Yes, I expect the number on the loans to be restructured to the households to go up. Looking at the real economy, real sector right now, unemployment figures shot up, doubling in the second quarter from 5.2% in the first quarter to 10.4%. And looking at even the disposable income that a typical household in Kenya is using, and just looking at some of the reports that have been issued by Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, a significant number of households were not able to meet their rental payments. So I expect that it's just a matter of time that you're seeing that even this number of household loans that are being restructured now ballooning in the third quarter numbers as they come due, and also for the fourth quarter. Remember that still we are not yet out of the woods in regards to COVID-19 pandemic, so I expect the numbers still to swell up as we close the year.
Indeed. So related to that, the total NPL number as well has been rising consistently throughout the year. We're now standing at 13.6% as of end August. But the leading economic data suggests a recovery in Q3. But is that recovery, in your view, going to be sufficient to stop NPLs from rising further?
Well, let me just start by commenting about the leading economic indicators for the third quarter. And what I fault about the leading economic indicators is they're really skewed towards the trade segment. What you hear about exports of flowers, or agricultural produce. So most of that is skewed towards one part of the demand side of the equation.
Because it's all export focused.
Exports. Yes, yeah. And what we know that in terms of, if you look at Kenya is a net importer nation. So whatever gains that we get, whatever in terms of exports, ultimately that is it's deducted in terms of the net importer status of Kenya. So looking at the real economy and looking at the consumption trends in the Kenya, looking at things to do like core inflation has been quite subdued even prior to COVID-19, and that has been accelerated by the pandemic. Right now we are averaging 1.9%, still quite subdued. So my view is that
Just to clarify on that, essentially
the,
your thesis with regard to inflation is that we're seeing a decline other than the supply side things, because yes, food prices have been low because supplies are good, but there's also a lack of demand element that's coming in essentially driving inflation down. That's the inflation thesis you're putting forward.
Yes, 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 absolutely. I'm looking at from the demand side of the equation. I'm not seeing that robust demand in the economy. So just to skim over through the leading economic indicators, I still see that in terms of the economic recovery, we are still not yet out of the woods. And now, just to take you back to the question that you asked about the non-performing loans, I still expect it to continue gradually ballooning up. Remember that some of these loans were tracked prior to COVID-19 hitting our shores in Kenya. So these numbers are numbers even prior to March 2nd, to be exact. So I expect that as the coronavirus the pandemic protracts, and it will be quite difficult even for some of the businesses, or even the businesses that were not even that were in good books with their banks to service some of their loans. So expect it still to continue swelling up from 13% that we are in currently.
Indeed. I'm glad you brought up the business angle, because the MPC was also talking about the imminent, in their words, making it functional, the SME credit guarantee scheme to bolster lending to that segment. But what specific problems must it solve in order to achieve its aims? Because at this point in time, one, banks are deeply reluctant to lend, but also you have to ask, is there actual demand for credit at a time when consumer spending is falling?
Yes, the government is putting up $1 billion credit guarantee scheme. But if you compare with the actual loans that has been disbursed by the banking sector, that's like a 3% of that. So I'm saying that on one hand, even this credit guarantee scheme will be just a stopgap measure, and in minute degree to what we have. Of course, just looking at the headline numbers, private sector credit growth as at August was 8.3%. But if you work the actual numbers, we did some estimates between April up until July, the actual amounts that was disbursed by government by banks to the real sector was around $450 million. So that's quite insignificant, comparing that we had a 125 basis points cut between the months of March and April. So that is another factor that you're looking at. So banks are still risk averse in terms of extending credit to the real economy. Hence, even as we get on that imminent, quote unquote, operationalization of the SME credit guarantee scheme, I think by and large the government needs to ensure that the business environment for the SMEs are quite conducive for them even to get some demand for the loans to be extended by banks. Because ideally, the credit guarantee scheme is now coming as a backstop by the government, but ultimately this micro, small, and medium enterprises needs to seek loans from banks. But unless that they are seeing even the opportunities for them to operate somehow recovered, I don't see that there'll be quite outsized demand by MSMEs
Right.
to get into the borrowing bandwagon.
All right, one last question for you. So the macroeconomic environment is still relatively weak. So how do investors trade this? How should we be rebalancing portfolios, getting out of the mid-tier listed banks because we are seeing a rise in NPLs there, and then rebalancing into tier one institutions, the KCBs, the equities, the standard banks, and so on?
Yes, I think the biggest theme right now for any investor who's looking at the banking sector is just to look at which are the names that are quite solid, at least to ride the storm that we have in COVID-19. They're still yet not out of the woods. There's not much progress in terms of a tangible solution, that is the vaccine that has been discovered. So by and large, I still see that what investors should be keen on are those banking stocks that have some big buffers to ride the storm. Remember that even we're coming at a point whereby banks have even sent out signals that even dividends payment will not be in the cards in the course of this calendar year. So that's another thing. It's a layer of headwinds to investors. So ultimately, and now what investors are just chuffing through the banking sector books is to those names that are really outstanding, and tier one, as you correctly put it, stand out for in terms of the investment considerations.
Indeed, it certainly puts a new spin on the whole idea of cash being king. Churchill Ogutu from Genghis Capital, thank you very much. Now, we're still in East Africa's largest economy. Kenyan-based insurer Jubilee Holdings is selling majority stakes in its regional general insurance subsidiaries to the global insurance giant Allianz for $100 million. Now, the deal is one of the largest transactions in the industry in recent years. Allianz will essentially acquire controlling stakes of anywhere between 51 and 66% in Jubilee's short-term or general insurance units in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi and Mauritius. Jubilee, however, will retain significant stakes in the general insurance business in the deal that's expected to be concluded sometime in the first quarter of 2021. It will also take over Allianz's operations in Kenya. Now, the firm shares rose by the maximum daily limit in thin trading on the 30th of September. A few hours ago, I spoke to the chair of Jubilee Holdings, Nizar Juma. I started my conversation with him by asking him why the company decided to retain the medical insurance portfolio, despite the sector as a whole reporting an underwriting loss of nearly $10 million in 2018.
Our both top line and bottom line is quite healthy and has been for some years. We are leading the medical business. And so we felt that at the present time, we don't need support because we are the market leaders here and in Uganda, Tanzania as well. So that's why we have kept medical and life away from this deal with Allianz. On the other hand, the deal that we've done in general also precludes Allianz from competing with us on medical and general for the next 5 years.
Looking at the financial side of it, the total consideration at play here for the stakes in question, the ones in, I believe it's Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, short-term insurance business in Burundi and Mauritius, that was about 10.8 billion shillings, about $100 million. When I spoke to some investors about this yesterday, one of the things they kept asking was, should they expect a special dividend at some point?
Right. That we don't know yet, and as you know that we are a public company, we can't divulge that information. But I think the important thing for people to know is that, you know, this is limited to general insurance. In addition to the 10.8 billion, we have also taken over their company in Kenya. So, you know, Allianz Insurance Kenya has now been, or will be taken over by our general insurance company. So that is also part of the purchase price, so to speak.
What moving forward though, because as I understand it, this deal has been in the works for quite a while. What exactly, why did it take so long to eventually be finalized? Yeah. Were there regulatory bottlenecks? Was it approvals that took too long to come through?
No, I don't think it was regulatory at all. I think that, you know, traditionally, Jubilee has not been a good bedfellow to partners. And, you know, so we were resisting because most of the insurance companies that wanted to partner with us were offering money.
They're essentially trying to buy you out, weren't they?
Yeah, and we don't need money. So I think that we want to go to the next level mostly in advancement of current technology. So I think that that's why it took so long, because we wanted everything to be right. We wanted a merger. We wanted, you know, an arrangement where we will grow faster than we would on our own. And it's not about money. We were also, first of all, also looking at medical and other of life, but we finally decided that it was only general that we wanted to go into bed with them. We were also considering partnering with them in the other 12 African companies where they have insurance company. And that has not been ruled out yet. And we have the option to buy a percentage of those 12 companies as well.
Is that option
So,
essentially time-bound? So perhaps over the same 5-year horizon of that non-compete clause that you mentioned earlier?
I think that we have the right to choose to decide that within the next 5 years. And I think that, we will decide it before that.
2020, of course, has been an incredibly difficult year for a lot of enterprises. And when we last spoke, I know we didn't speak about future acquisitions, but given what has happened now, you've made this deal with Allianz. Are there any other deals that you might be considering over the short term? Maybe not in 2020, but in 2021? Or is this it? You're essentially done with acquisitions, at least for the medium term?
No, we are not done with acquisitions. I think that our relationship with Allianz even helps us to acquire more and more companies.
On to North Africa now. Travel agencies over there are facing collapse as lockdown measures keep much of the world's population at home. Tourist activity in the North African nation has fallen by at least 60% in the last 9 months due to the pandemic, and is expected to reach 70% by the end of the year. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Adin Chouachi with the details.
According to Tunisia's tourism ministry, 98% of travel agencies operating in the North African country are threatened with bankruptcy by the end of October 2020, if the financial support measures taken by the government to support the sector since the beginning of the COVID-19 health crisis are not implemented. During a meeting with Prime Minister Hisham al-Mishishi, Tunisian travel agents warned that there were more than 1,300 travel agencies employing nearly 20,000 direct and indirect jobs facing collapse.
We were hit hard by the crisis. The tourism sector in general paid a heavy price. The government took several decisions to support this vital economic sector. I acknowledge that we have to accelerate the implementation of the urgent measures. We tried to save this tourist season, but the epidemiological situation has not improved.
According to a recent study published by the Tunisian Federation of Travel Agencies and Tourism, almost all of the professionals in the industry said that they will be threatened with bankruptcy if the state does not intervene quickly and provide a credit line of $180 million. This amount will enable operators in the tourism sector to pay the salaries of their employees.
The government took several measures since April in favor of the sector, such as rescheduling the settlement of bank and social security fund debts, granting advantageous credits whose repayment period extends over 5 years with a grace period of 2 years, and with a guarantee of the state. However, this important measure, which was supposed to alleviate financial crisis in the hotels, has not been implemented.
The tourism minister declared that tourist activity in Tunisia has declined by 60% in the last 9 months due to the negative repercussions of the COVID-19 crisis. Habib Ammar estimated that this rate will reach 70% by the end of this year.
The negative impact on tourism is global. According to the World Tourism Organization, the sharp decline in the activity will hit 70% in the next few months. Tunisia is not an exception. We are trying to minimize the impact of this crisis.
Tourism professionals have called on the state to provide public guarantees for public lending and to extend the deadlines for leasing. This favor will also include the deferral of the payment of additional charges like taxes, social security fund contributions, as well as bank credits until December 2021. According to the Tunisian Federation of Travel Agencies and Tourism, 28% of travel agents lost their jobs during the general lockdown, while 80% of travel agencies can no longer withstand this unprecedented crisis and honor their financial commitments beyond September. Adin Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
All right, then a quick run through some company news starting in Nigeria. The mobility startup Max.ng has raised $1 million in capital under a vehicle lease through a private company bond program. According to the firm, the transaction is the first securitization of motorcycle, tricycle and other classes of vehicle finance assets in sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa. It's also the first bond issuance and asset-backed bond transaction by a mobility company on the continent. Elsewhere, shareholders of the struggling Kenyan retailer Tuskys have unanimously approved efforts to secure structured credit facilities amounting to over $18 million. In a statement, the board of directors says that an extraordinary general meeting held on Monday facilitated the sealing of that external funding. The meeting convened by Oricom Holdings Limited, that's Tuskys' main shareholder, and it aimed to streamline the ongoing corporate recapitalization operation. South Africa's state-owned airline SAA has mothballed all operations. The carrier, as you might recall, entered local bankruptcy protection in December last year after a decade of financial losses. It last reported a profit back in 2011. The business rescue team assigned to manage the airline now says it has failed to raise the money needed to implement a rescue plan for the airline. SAA's rescue plan requires at least $600 million to pull off. And finally, in the car world, the former Audi boss Rupert Stadler has become the first top executive to stand trial over Germany's Dieselgate scandal, which rocked the car industry back in 2015. Mr. Stadler appeared before a court in Munich on Wednesday to face charges including fraud, which he denies. Audi's owner, Volkswagen, has admitted to installing software that was capable of cheating emissions tests in at least 11 million diesel vehicles worldwide. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Zambia is asking Eurobond holders to suspend debt payments, but will they agree? And South Africa is banking on its mining sector in order to bootstrap its battered economy. Will the gambit work? Some answers coming up shortly.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Niger. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to Zambia now. The country's president, or rather the country's government, has asked international bondholders to suspend interest payment demands on at least $3 billion worth of international bonds starting in October. Now, the bonds have been issued since 2012. They're part of Zambia's broader debt load of at least $12 billion. And as a proportion of GDP, Zambia's debts have gone up from 20% to nearly 80% of GDP. Now, several reports do estimate, however, that the real figures are at least double what the official stats suggest, mostly due to off-balance sheet loans from public-private partnership infrastructure deals, which may include underlying assets as collateral. Now, the freeze of debt servicing would be the first de facto default by an African sovereign to private creditors since the start of the pandemic, with Angola, Ethiopia and Ghana also seen as likely to default. Kenya, on the other hand, has said it is at risk of debt distress. South Africa, in the meantime, is banking on a rejuvenation of its mining industry to help counter the economic devastation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and a lockdown which was imposed to curb the spread of that particular pathogen. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with that story.
There's good news in the mining sector because its operations were mostly unaffected by the lockdowns, and recovering commodity prices in US dollar terms also helped.
The mining sector has a typical V recovery and quite strongly. In some instances, we are still below the averages before COVID, if you work up to, say, January, February, March. But we have recovered.
And the quick recovery is good news for an economy starved of foreign currency earnings.
We cannot do without the mining sector because although the mining sector's contribution is only 8% of GDP, what it buys from the other sectors is as important. And I think we've got to look at that. And I'm not sure if it's enough and if they can grow enough, because there's also commodity cycles. And at the moment, commodity cycles, apart from precious metals, are rather on the low side.
The mining sector consumption expenditure is also critical to the South African economy, but it's lagging.
Only about 70% of our labor force is back. Now that has a major impact on consumption expenditure emanating from us, as well as pay as you earn type of thing. So the impact, the follow through, pass through will be higher as these people are coming back.
Policy uncertainty and many development plans have been a part of the South African economic landscape for several years.
Cynicism about policies is well placed. If you rewind over the last 20, 25 years of South Africa's economic history, the policy promises and pronouncements and the economic result have become increasingly divorced.
Others have a different view about the current policy environment, which has changed with the spread of the pandemic.
The event of this crisis has certainly put us closer to one another. There's very open relationships now, not only between the minister and our office bearers, but between the staff that are responsible for licensing, for example, and support for the self-generation to get that going, etc. So that is there, and you have to get that before you get action.
Despite that, the Mineral Resources and Energy Department won't be drawn on the mining sector and plans to expand its role in the country's economic growth until the Economic Redevelopment Plan is finalised by Cabinet. It remains to be seen whether the mining industry is going to be able to pull the South African economy out of the doldrums. What's not needed right now are more plans. It's now time for action. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to Nigeria now for a look at an infrastructure project on that end of the world. The country's announced plans to build a near $2 billion rail line from the country's northwestern state of Kano to the city of Maradi in neighboring Niger. Now, the government says that 248-kilometer rail line will boost Nigeria's strong trade presence in landlocked Niger and ease the movement of both goods and persons in both countries. But even before construction starts, the project is already generating controversy in the country, as CGTN's Deji Badmos now explains.
Award of contract for the development of the proposed Kano, Katsina, Jibia to Maradi rail line in Niger Republic, and to Dutse, the capital of Jigawa, for a total cost of $1.9 billion.
Mixed reactions have since trailed that announcement by the minister, with Nigerians sharply divided over the significance of the project.
There is a dearth of infrastructure in the healthcare sector of this country, in the educational sector of this country, in road infrastructure. We have this serious deficit infrastructure. To now commit a whopping $1.9 billion to enhance the development of another country without any visible economic returns to this country is something that a lot of people feel is despicable and an act of unpatriotism.
There are certain people that travel to Niger Republic that take goods from one country, or from Nigeria to Niger, and also from Niger back to Nigeria. Most especially, you see perishable goods going from Nigeria to Niger Republic. So that will make goods cheaper for them there, and that will make their own products that we don't have cheaper for us here.
The government has, however, been defending its decision on the rail line, asking the citizens to look at the larger picture and that the project will be of great value to the country's railway infrastructure.
Landlocked states are states that have no access to the sea. Now, Niger is one of them.
One of them, yeah.
So what we are doing by extending our railroad to Maradi is to make a strong presence and compete for export and import of goods and raw materials from Maradi to leave through Lagos Port and come through Lagos Port.
Nigeria has been spending big on modernizing its rail infrastructure. At the moment, it's about completing the strategic 156-kilometer standard gauge rail line that will link the commercial city of Lagos to the southwestern city of Ibadan. And plans have reached the advanced stage to expand the rail line to the city of Kano in the north. The Abuja-Kaduna rail line has since been completed and operational. More rail contracts are expected to be awarded in the coming months.
I'm very confident that that investment will more than pay for itself, in the sense that it is going to allow goods and services and people to move from one part of the country to the other in the most efficient and the most safe manner. Every country today that is, whose economy is doing well, is because people, their leaders had the foresight to invest in rail, in roads, and in power. And that's exactly what we're doing.
The Kano-Maradi rail line will have 12 stations and link 3 states in northern Nigeria before terminating in Niger's second largest city. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
From Nigeria on to Egypt. Tourism is a key plank of that country's economy. Since many countries around the world stopped international travel altogether, Egypt has been losing an estimated $1 billion in tourism revenues every month. The country has now opened up its airports, but it's welcoming back foreign visitors. But there have been a lot fewer coming back than expected. CGTN's Adel Maruki reports from the tourist resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh.
Despite the country's desperate need for the foreign currency generated by tourism, the government has been forced to restrict Egyptian hotels to just half of their usual occupancy rates. This helps the hotels to comply with the distancing regulations aimed at ensuring the safety of visitors during this COVID-19 pandemic. The country has been implementing strict anti-epidemic measures at hotels as it seeks to gain the trust of international travelers.
The tourism sector understands that if measures are taken lightly, this will mean an infection in the hotel, shutting down the hotel and leaving its whole crew jobless. We are taking measures that are extremely strict, and probably that has never happened before. Any hotel that violates measures or sacks employees will be immediately shut.
The policy appears to be very effective.
Egypt is one of the countries which require test to COVID. Yeah, so we had this test and we decided to camp. So it's great because we know that it's a little risk to, for example, to have COVID in Egypt. Maybe a little bit worried about it, of course, but we have read a lot of comments on different sites and decided to come.
We all have to continue to live, to enjoy our lives. So if a person takes all the measures that are now known all over the world, so if you take care about yourself, it's not a problem to come anywhere, to travel and discover the world. This is for me the first time in Egypt, and I really like it.
Among the few visitors here are those who had already booked trips before the global pandemic lockdown. They were offered a full refund for their trips, yet they chose to visit Egypt as soon as it opened its hotels.
We bought the tour in February, so we were waiting for this tour for a very long time. Now we're happy to come here. Everybody is worried about this virus, but we're not. The hotel is great. With they are protecting us with masks, with sanitizers, with all the thought of things. So we are fine here.
Egypt's tourism industry employs about 10% of the country's workforce. It brings nearly double the revenues of the Suez Canal annually.
From 100,000 visitors arriving in a single day down to just 2,000, Sharm el-Sheikh is struggling. But despite their small numbers, these people here are giving this Red Sea resort city a huge support under the COVID-19 pandemic. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
It's 18:33 GMT, time for a break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore why a second wave of coronavirus infections may spark more job losses in the United Kingdom. We'll also explore how disputes between China and the United States are threatening cooperation on dealing with climate change.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? what happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting with a court in France. It's ruled that the Rwandan genocide suspect Felicien Kabuga can stand trial at the UN tribunal in Arusha, Tanzania. France's top civil court dismissed arguments by Mr. Kabuga's legal team that he was too frail to be extradited. Kabuga is accused of bankrolling the genocide, which lasted for at least 100 days. The 85-year-old was arrested in Paris in May, ending a manhunt that lasted for more than 2 decades. Also, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization has warned of severe drought in Uganda. That is expected to occur somewhere between the end of 2020 and the start of 2021. The agency says that dry spell will cause food scarcity across the country. And finally, the 75th United Nations General Assembly has drawn to a close in what has been a dramatically different coming together of world powers. The pandemic forced the majority of speeches and high-level meetings to be done entirely online. How to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and the widespread economic and social damage it's inflicting was a main topic of discussion in this session. That's a run through your headlines. On to the United Kingdom now. A second wave of COVID-19 infections is expected to coincide with a jump in unemployment. Now, to date, this pandemic has cost over 700,000 people in the UK their jobs, and that's just between the months of March and August. It also pushed the unemployment rate above 4% for the first time since October 2018. CGTN's Andrew Wilson takes up the story from London.
The government needed a more positive mood, and this was to be it. A promise to invest in jobs just as the second wave coincides with a likely jump in unemployment. The Prime Minister toured a further education college in the southwest to see apprenticeships at work. He's pledged nearly $2 billion of investment to train adults who never finished school in the vital new skills he says the economy needs. Skills the government will announce later.
As part of our lifetime skills guarantee, we will now fund technical courses for adults equivalent to A-level, all of which teach skills that are highly in demand. They'll give anyone who left school without an A-level or equivalent the qualifications they need when they need them.
As far as Downing Street's concerned, the economy is Boris Johnson's exposed flank. As new restrictions start to bite, so does resentment within his party at the excess of caution. It was left to the Education Secretary to tackle alarm at the lockdowns in Britain's universities.
We believe that universities are very well prepared to handle any outbreaks as they arise, and we have been working with the sector and Public Health England to make sure that they have every support and assistance they need should this happen.
The opposition thinks students should be allowed home again.
So what Labour are saying is just pause for a moment, allow them to access their learning online, sort out test, track and trace, and then get them back to the university so they can have some face-to-face learning.
Its delivery might be erratic, but this is all part of the government's winter plan. Prepare people for tougher rules, keep them mindful of the risks, but keep the silver lining at least somewhere near the cloud. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
In a pretty acrimonious 19-minute debate, the US president attacked his Democratic challenger's plan to slash greenhouse gas emissions in order to combat climate change. Mr. Trump and the former Vice President Joe Biden clashed in the first of 3 debates on Tuesday. Mr. Trump argues that emission cuts would essentially wreck the American economy. Now, 6 years ago, the US and China formed a partnership that led to the Paris Agreement, but recent disputes between the two largest economies in the world have dramatically reduced bilateral cooperation. CGTN's Edis Tianxian reports from Los Angeles.
A historic moment in the fight against climate change when former U.S. President Barack Obama hosted the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and the two sides vowed their joint commitment to reducing emissions.
One of the world's two largest economies,
energy consumers and carbon emitters come together like this, then there's no reason for other countries, whether developed or developing, to not do so as well.
This cooperation is what paved the way for a global climate pact.
The Paris Accord came about because President Obama reached out to China, but the two countries together were the ones that brought the rest of the nations of the world to the table and got that agreement. With the United States now having as its leader a person who wants to pull away from that role, there is this vacuum.
Since the U.S. decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, several states, including California, pledged their continued commitment to carbon reduction. And in fact, California's former governor, Jerry Brown, founded the California-China Climate Institute, where the scientific collaboration continues.
In some ways, the collaboration has continued, regardless of administration, because I think the researchers are really on the same page. The pathways to actually achieving what seem to be insurmountable goals are becoming more and more plausible, more and more feasible every day in terms of the price of renewable energy dropping precipitously.
China recently announced its pledge to reach carbon neutrality in the next 40 years.
China will scale up its intended nationally determined contributions by adopting more vigorous policies and measures. We aim to have CO2 emissions peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060.
But without a strong collaboration, especially among the world's top emitters, solving the climate crisis will be a challenge.
Without the big emitters, all the efforts that are made will not be enough.
Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden's platform also includes a pledge to carbon neutrality. But for the time being, the United States remains the only country among the world's top economies with a president who rejects man-made climate change.
So we're getting out.
It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Now, microfarms are sprouting up in somewhat unlikely areas in Venezuela. You see, a severe fuel shortage in the country, despite the country having copious amounts of oil, is making it difficult for farmers in rural areas to get the produce to urban centres. And that has pushed food prices way out of reach of many who live in cities. As CGTN's Mary Chunimena reports from Caracas, these microfarms are one way of adapting to those high prices and the scarcity they create.
It may seem he's plowing the soil in the rich farmland of the Venezuelan Andes, but this farmer is working right in the heart of Venezuela's capital, in the Petare slum. Roy Gonzalez is growing cilantro and green onions on an abandoned plot of land just a short walk from home. A former construction worker turned urban farmer.
Our economic situation is bad and everybody is looking for a piece of land because there is no work and plots are providing a job. If you grow something on a piece of land, you will always have something to sell and something to feed yourself. If you don't do that, you'll go hungry.
Gonzalez works alongside Manuel Hernandez, who also lives in Petare. In 8 months, they have turned this plot into a profitable business. They keep some of what they grow for their families, but sell most of it to their neighbors.
When we do have coriander or green onions, we buy tomatoes at the food market, and we prepare a bag, a combo, and we sell that in the slum.
They say working together means they can pool their resources to buy more seeds and invest in the crops and offer better prices to their neighbors. For many Venezuelans, it is a practical solution to buy fruits and vegetables at local food markets, especially if they are close to their homes. Amid the pandemic and increasing food prices on a daily basis, urban crops and local street sellers are booming. Dozens of people are also taking up urban farming in Petare. Handyman Carlos Licey often helps his neighbors Roy and Manuel in exchange for some of what they harvest.
The economic situation in the country has pushed many families here to find new places using every available space, and each one chooses a plot and little by little starting crops to survive.
After a hard day working the soil, these urban farmers take a moment to take it all in. They will have a short walk home where, thanks to the last harvest, they've got food on the table. Maritrini Mena, CGTN, Caracas.
The government in Spain has announced that it is extending its furlough scheme through to January 2021. The job protection scheme was introduced in March in order to help the economy deal with the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's CGTN's Rahul Pathak with this report from Madrid.
As expected, the furlough scheme, known in Spain as the ERTE scheme, has been extended until January the 31st next year, with the country's Labour Minister Yolanda Díaz saying it will remain in place for as long as necessary. Now, the scheme provides workers who are unable to work because of the pandemic with 70% of their base salary for the first 6 months before dropping to 50% for the following months. Now, at the height of the pandemic, it was supporting around 7 million people. Now, Spain's national lockdown was lifted in June, but as of September, 750,000 people are still receiving ERTE benefits. Now, Spain has been one of the countries hardest hit by the pandemic, both in terms of health, with nearly 750,000 confirmed cases, and the economy, with the government imposing one of the strictest lockdowns in Europe, triggering the deepest recession in Spanish history. Well, speaking following a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, Mrs. Díaz said it is a day of hope for our country's businesses and workers. If we can make it through the autumn and the winter, then we will definitely be entering a recovery. Now, as well as all the talk about hope and recovery, there is the question about how much all of this is costing. The government revealing on Tuesday the total cost between April and September of Spain's COVID-19 social protection measures, which includes the ERTE scheme, cost $25.7 billion. Now, at some point, the government is going to have to find some way of balancing those books. But right now, its most pressing concern is to avoid a huge increase in unemployment in a country that's already been crippled economically by this crisis. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Now, compared to its decades-old counterparts in Japan and the United States, China's animation industry is just starting out. But the sector is making strides in international markets, as CGTN's Ying Junyi now reports on what's hot tonight.
It's just 8 in the morning, but this Tumax animation studio has been busy for a while already. The company is now preparing for the overseas release of its latest animated film, The Old Man and Two Mountains. From a Chinese fable about an old man who did the impossible, he moved 2 mountains that were blocking the path in front of his house. By moving a few mountains themselves, the producer says his studio has been able to combine its own skill base with professionals from foreign firms.
We are partnering with an overseas translation group, and the translation as well as the dubbing was done overseas. We also have called in Hollywood screenwriters to help us make the film more competitive in global markets.
The studio is also working on another animated film adapted from yet another traditional Chinese folk story. There are plenty of those, and preparing to release it overseas as well. Yao says the successful appeal of Chinese mythology-based animation in recent years, such as with the cartoon feature哪吒, has given them confidence in foreign audiences.
Foreigners interested in Chinese culture and the overseas Chinese, they are our audience. As for the animation techniques, the China's animation industry now does not lag behind other countries as it used to. The crucial point is telling those traditional folk stories clearly.
The animations don't always have to be based on traditional folk tales. Streaming giant Netflix began airing the comedy series Caesar 7 this January, making it the first Chinese animated series to debut as a Netflix original. Netflix dubbed it in 4 languages and subtitled it in 29 to release it in 190 countries and regions. The producer says the show's universal emotions and cross-cultural appeal are what have made it popular.
What we think is humorous in the series, overseas audiences also think is funny. We also find foreign viewers using words like heartwarming in their comments, and the Chinese audiences often also say that. We think they are sharing the same emotions when they watch it.
Zhou also believes the gap between domestic and foreign animation is narrowing, with the emergence of more young Chinese animators with global visions and aesthetics. A report from industry statistics provider Report Linker says The output value of Chinese animation business is expected to stand at 375 billion yuan by 2025, surging from just 200 billion last year. Ying Jun, ICS for CGTN Shanghai.
Quick run through commodity prices for you. So we're going to be all over the place for this, really. Let's start with cocoa. Futures due in December down at least 2% at 1623 GMT. They're still positive on a year-to-date basis, but prices have fallen by over 5 months. 5% rather, in September. Platinum back over $900 today, up just over 2% at 1625 GMT. All prices, however, continue their decline. Brent down 0.4%, taking it to about 33.7% in the red so far in the year. More supply is certainly coming into the market from Libya, with Serir field reopening for business 24 hours ago. Output at the moment is about 30,000 barrels a day, but this, remember, is a field that's capable of putting out 200,000 barrels of crude every day. Here's what's coming up next. We'll bring you the story of a Nigerian entrepreneur who's smashing glass ceilings in a male-dominated sector. Welcome back. In many parts of the world, the automotive industry is male-dominated. Tonight's story, however, is about a female entrepreneur in Nigeria who's smashing glass ceilings left and right in Africa's largest oil producer. In her makeshift workshop, Ukamaka Okoye manufactures spare parts for motorcycles and tricycles with the help of a mostly female team. This is her story on Grassroots Tonight with CGTN's Noel Mokugu.
Sifting through a pile of metal scraps, Ukamaka Okoye is ready to liquefy them at high heat at her makeshift workshop. Okoye is a Nigerian entrepreneur. She manufactures spare parts mainly for motorcycles and rickshaws, commonly known as tuk-tuks. Both are popular means of transport in Africa's most populous nation. Before engaging in her business, Okoye picked up technical skills at a vocational workshop. This was followed by her own operation, FEMCO, which the 38-year-old set up in 2013 with about $1,300. Today, FEMCO produces a variety of parts from battery head terminals, brake and clutch levers, to footrests for tuk-tuks.
I want to reduce the gap between importation and so that our people will now focus on locally made products, especially the motorcycle spares, because they do go to China or other foreign country to buy those things. Why we can do it here? That is why, as a woman, I want to do something different from other women. So I decided to go into this.
The recent partial border closures and a hike in import taxes in Nigeria have forced spare part traders like Michael Ogubani to turn to locally produced products. Loading their durability, Ogubani says Okoye's products are 36% cheaper than imported brands. On a regular basis, Ogubani buys over 1,000 clutch levers from FEMCO.
It's very affordable for the poor masses also, because the price between it and the imported one, there is a lot of gap in it. Like imported one, you can get some 130, 140, but this one you can get 90, 85 naira. So you can see the gap, both rich and the poor masses can get it.
With a team of 5 women, Okoye is not only scrapping metals. The entrepreneur is also inspiring women to pick up the torque wrench and spearhead advancement in Nigeria's male-dominated automobile industry.
A woman can do what a man can do. And when she starts doing it, she can even do it better than the men. So since I've been the only woman doing this, so when people come here, they are just amazed. They are surprised seeing a woman doing this. But I enjoy doing it. It's what I love, and I'm doing it.
With even a monthly income of just over $780, Okoye has no plans of slowing down and encourages women to follow their own ambitions. Noel Makubu, CGTN.
And finally, the multi-billion-dollar trade in second-hand clothing arguably helps prevent the global fashion industry's growing pile of waste from going straight into a landfill. It also keeps wardrobes clear for next season's designs. But 2020 is a somewhat different year, as you might have noticed, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's forced the industry to largely grind to a halt. CGTN's Alexandria Majala unpacks what may happen next.
Clothing recycling is the pressure release valve of fast fashion and is buckling under COVID-19 curbs. Exporters, traders and customers in often poorer nations from Africa to Eastern Europe and Latin America who rely on a steady supply of used clothes are struggling.
We keep going, but we couldn't sell any clothes during this lockdown. So the second-hand market in Europe and the rest of the clubs closed down. So we've been store. We have 4 warehouses in UK. So it means we have full warehouse during the time.
Since May, charges to overseas buyers dropped from $726 a ton to $517, making it hard for Green World Recycling to cover the cost of collecting and storing items. From London to Los Angeles, many thrift shops and clothing banks have been deluged with more clothes than could be sold on. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, textile recyclers and exporters have had to cut their prices to shift stock as lockdown measures restrict movement and business slows in end markets abroad. For many, it's no longer commercially viable and they can't afford to move merchandise. The consequences of the decline can be seen in countries like Kenya, which imported 176,000 tons of second-hand clothing in 2018, equivalent to over 335 million pairs of jeans.
We used to depend on bales. We cannot buy bales directly, so we buy our stock from those who had already bought them. When coronavirus came in, there was no new supplies of bales, posing a challenge to me. That meant that there was no stock and no money.
Business for Matisi and his colleagues is sluggish in the open-air Gikomba market in Nairobi, Kenya, one of the biggest second-hand clothes markets in East Africa.
Before coronavirus came in, I would manage to sell at least 50 trousers a day. But now with coronavirus, even selling one a day has become difficult. You open in the morning and close in the evening in the same state, without selling.
Traders have been hit with a double whammy of the shrinking supply, exacerbated by the government banning the import of used textiles in March over concerns they could carry the novel coronavirus, and a drop in footfall due to people staying home. The ban on used textiles imports was lifted in August after pushback from traders in Kenya and industry bodies in Europe and the United States, who said second-hand clothes were safe as the virus could not survive the journey to Africa. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
All right, then, a run through the currencies for you. Now, we did focus on Kenyan macro data following the MPC meeting at the start of the hour. One data point, however, that I didn't mention was that the MPC pointed out that leading economic indicators are pointing to a recovery in Q3 vis-a-vis Q2. Now, we were expecting second quarter GDP data earlier today. It usually comes out at the end of the third quarter, but the Kenyan Stats Office says it has been delayed. Quote, the delay has been occasioned by late submission of data necessary for the compilation as a result of COVID-19 challenges. So the report, according to the Stats Office, will be disseminated at the earliest opportunity. When that is, we don't know. But when we get the data, you'll hear it first right here on the program. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There are many ways to get your feedback back to us. All of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.